December 31st, 2006. Most people spent that day nursing hangovers, making resolutions they wouldn't keep. But in a quiet office in the British Treasury, someone cut a check for $83 million to the United States government. It was the final payment on a debt that had haunted Britain for 6 decades. 3 generations. Grandparents, parents, children had all paid taxes to settle a bill that started in 1946. The war had been over for 61 years, and Britain had just finished paying for it. But here's the thing nobody tells you in history class. That debt, it wasn't for winning World War II. It was the price America charged Britain just to stay in the fight. The textbooks call it Lend-Lease. They show you photos of Churchill and Roosevelt shaking hands, and they tell you America saved Britain from Hitler. Which, okay, technically true. But what they don't mention is that while Britain was fighting for survival, the United States was systematically stripping every valuable asset the British Empire possessed. We're talking about the largest peaceful wealth transfer in human history. Britain entered World War II as the world's wealthiest nation, controlling a quarter of the planet's surface, holding more overseas investments than anyone else, sitting on mountains of gold. Britain exited that same war completely bankrupt. Gold reserves gone. Global investments liquidated. Strategic military bases leased to America for 99 years. And oh yeah, $31 billion in debt. That's about $486 billion in today's money. The empire itself, that was the real cost. And here's what makes this whole thing so brilliant. In a dark kind of way, it was all perfectly legal. Documented, signed, America didn't conquer the British Empire. They bought it, piece by piece, while Britain was too busy fighting Nazis to notice the price tag. The letter that changed everything, December 8, 1940. Winston Churchill wrote what would become the most consequential letter of his political career. The recipient, Franklin Roosevelt. The message, we're broke. German U-boats were hunting British ships in the Atlantic. The Luftwaffe was turning London into rubble night after night. The British Army desperately needed everything: weapons, ammunition, tanks, aircraft. And Churchill had to tell the President of the United States that Britain's treasury was empty. Not struggling, completely empty. 7 months. That's how long it took to burn through everything. Here's the context you need. Before September 1939, Britain wasn't just wealthy, Britain was wealth. The British Empire sprawled across 35.5 million square kilometers. British citizens owned $22 billion in overseas investments, equivalent to roughly $450 billion today. Railroads in Argentina, copper mines in Chile, rubber plantations in Malaysia, oil fields in Persia. The city of London was the financial capital of planet Earth. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. 7 months of war, that's all it took to make it disappear. The American trap. How did this happen so fast? America had a law called cash and carry. Here's what it actually meant. If you're fighting a war and you want American weapons, you pay cash up front, gold on the table. No credit, no loans, no IOUs. And you transport everything on your own ships. Think about that for a second. Britain was fighting for its survival, and America, officially neutral, was running a Kashoni weapons shop, while U-boats were sinking British merchant ships. Britain had no choice. So in June 1940, they launched Operation Fish, one of the most insane logistics operations in history. Britain loaded its entire gold reserves onto battleships and ocean liners, and shipped them across the U-boat-infested Atlantic to vaults in Canada and the United States. $7 billion in gold bars and securities. The entire national treasure. By November 1940. Gone all of it. And Britain was still ordering supplies. But there were no dollars left to pay. Britain was 7 months into a war that would last 6 years. The money had already run out. The garden hose lie, you've probably heard Roosevelt's famous analogy. If your neighbor's house is on fire, You don't charge him for the garden hose. Beautiful story. Pure fiction. The reality of Lend-Lease was negotiated by Henry Morgenthau Jr., Roosevelt's Treasury Secretary, and Morgenthau wasn't interested in neighborly favors. He was interested in stripping Britain of every remaining asset before providing a single dollar of aid. In December 1940, before Lend-Lease was even approved by Congress, Morgenthau demanded a complete financial audit of the British Empire. Every asset owned by the British government, every asset owned by private British citizens anywhere in the world. Let that sink in. Britain was being bombed every night, and America's condition for aid was that Britain proved it was completely destitute. The British negotiators tried to argue. Sir Frederick Phillips warned that forcing the sale of investments during wartime would be financial suicide. A fire sale where Britain would get pennies on the dollar. Morgenthau didn't care. His position was brutal. If Britain still has assets in America, why should American taxpayers subsidize the war? Liquidate everything first, then we'll talk. The sacrificial offering. Morgenthau needed proof that Britain was broke. He founded an American Viscose Corporation, the largest rayon manufacturer in the United States, owned by a British company, worth over $100 million, generating $10 million annually. Morgenthau's ultimatum: sell it, or Lend-Lease dies in Congress. On March 15, 1941, the British government seized American Viscose under emergency powers. The sale was handled by American bankers who knew Britain was desperate. American Viscose sold for $54.4 million, half its actual value. This wasn't a transaction between allies. This was a foreclosure, and it was just the beginning. Morgenthau forced Britain to sell $1.1 billion in American investments, $22 billion today. Every sale tracked, verified, deposited. Only after the liquidation was complete did Lend-Lease funds begin flowing. Destroyers for bases, September 1940. Britain desperately needed destroyers to fight you, but Roosevelt agreed to give Britain 50 old World War I destroyer ships, literally rusting in mothballs. In exchange, Britain gave the United States 99-year leases on military bases in Newfoundland, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Antigua, and British Guiana. Britain gave America strategic control over the entire Western Hemisphere for 99 years, in exchange for 50 obsolete ships. It was like pawning your family estate for grocery money. The Lend-Lease Act passed on March 11, 1941. Eventually, $31 billion flowed to Britain. And yes, it kept Britain in the war. But better in the agreement was Article 7(1) clause requiring Britain to eliminate discriminatory treatment in international commerce after the war. This was code for imperial preference, the tariff system holding the British Empire together. British goods were cheaper in empire markets than foreign goods. This protected British industry from American competition. Article 7 required Britain to dismantle that system. The British negotiators understood immediately. This was the death warrant for the empire as an economic unit. But German bombers were overhead. Britain sunk the war that built America. While Britain fought, the American economy boomed. U.S. GDP grew 75% during the war. American factories produced weapons and consumer goods for global markets. Britain converted every factory to war production and stopped exporting. British companies abandoned markets worldwide. Who filled those markets? American companies. While British factories made American factories made Spitfires and refrigerators and radios and cars for the entire world. By 1944, global gold reserves had shifted from London to Fort Knox. The financial center of gravity had permanently crossed the Atlantic. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. Victory. 7 days later, President Truman signed Executive Order 9620. Lend-Lease was terminated. Immediately. Completely. American supply ships, mid-Atlantic, were ordered to turn around. The British government was paralyzed. They had assumed aid would continue during Reconstruction. Britain was importing half its food, paid for with Lend-Lease dollars. Without those dollars, starvation. John Maynard Keynes calculated that Britain faced a financial Dunkirk. There was only one option. Britain had to beg for a loan. Keynes's last mission, September 1945. Keynes traveled to Washington. He was 62, dying of heart disease. He wasn't going as a celebrated economist. He was going as a beggar. Keynes believed he had a moral case. Britain had fought alone for 2 years while America stayed neutral. Britain had sacrificed everything. Therefore, America should give Britain a grant $6 billion. Not a loan. A gift. The American negotiators were unmoved. They offered a loan, $3.75 billion at 2% interest. Barely enough to survive. And it came with conditions designed to destroy what remained of British independence, the most devastating. Sterling convertibility. Within 1 year, anyone holding British pounds could exchange them for US dollars. Keynes knew this would destroy Britain. He fought until his health collapsed, but the alternative was starvation. Britain signed. Keynes died in April 1946, his heart giving out under the stress. The massacre of 1947, the winter of 1947, was the coldest in British history. Blizzards buried the country, power stations shut down, and on July 10th, 1947, Britain made the pound convertible as required. The result? Massacre. The world rushed to sell pounds. In 1 month, Britain lost hundreds of millions. After just 5 weeks, Britain was forced to suspend convertibility. Britain had burned through a quarter of the loan in 5 weeks. For nothing. The humiliation had immediate consequences. In February 1947, Britain sent a telegram to Washington. For a century, we've guarded Greece and Turkey. We can no longer afford it. If you want to stop the communists, you do it. This triggered the Truman Doctrine, the formal acknowledgement that Britain was no longer a superpower. In 1949, Britain devalued the pound from $4.03 to $2.80. Overnight, the British people became 30% poorer, but the debt itself, never forgiven. Every year for 6 decades, the British Treasury wrote a check to the United States. Through the 1950s boom, the 1970s inflation, the Thatcher years, the Blair years, the payments continued. December 29, 2006. The final payment, 61 years after victory. Who really won? Henry Morgenthau orchestrated the liquidation and remained wealthy and influential. American banks made millions in fees. American corporations bought British assets at fire sale prices and doubled their money. The military-industrial complex made billions, and the United States government. By 1945, America held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. The dollar replaced the pound as the global reserve currency. American military bases circled the globe. The U.S. achieved global dominance, not through conquest, but through debt. The British Empire wasn't conquered. It was bought. A distressed asset sale managed by the U.S. Treasury. This wasn't unique to Britain. The same playbook has been used on every American ally since. Germany rebuilt through the Marshall Plan, but with conditions. Japan occupied and restructured. South Korea after the Korean War. The pattern repeats. Crisis creates dependency. Dependency requires concessions. Concessions transfer wealth and sovereignty. Their real story. The mythology teaches that America saved Britain. The reality is that America bought Britain, and Britain paid for 61 years. Understanding this isn't about hating America. It's about seeing how power actually works. Empires aren't built through obvious conquest anymore. They're built through finance, debt, and crisis management. When your ally is desperate, When the bombs are falling, that's when you extract concessions. That's when you rewrite the terms. The special relationship is celebrated as an alliance of equals. But look at the documents. Britain gave everything. America took everything. In December 1940, Churchill wrote to Roosevelt begging for aid. In doing so, he signed the deed of sale. He traded the empire for survival. It was a deal that had to be made. There was no choice, but the cost was the future. Britain defeated Hitler, but lost the empire. Britain won the war, but was bankrupted by its ally. 3 generations paid America for the privilege of surviving. The Lend-Lease Agreement wasn't the arsenal of democracy. It was the greatest asset-stripping operation in history, executed with legal precision while Britain fought for its life. And if you think this is just history, the same playbook is running right now. The dollar as reserve currency, heat a trap of treasury bonds. The military bases that ensured dependency. The pattern continues, refined over 8 decades. The only difference is that now, you know how it works.